Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for sitting with me today. Thank you to everybody online. I appreciate you all joining me this multi-holiday week and weekend. Happy Ramadan, happy Easter, happy Passover, and happy Hanamatsuri. Uh, I'll talk a little about Hanamatsuri today. Um, I was thinking about this quote I saw the other day about play. Um, who said it? Karen Purvis is the person who said it. She's a researcher or head person at the Center for the National Institute for Child Development, Center for Child Development, whatever the big one is. Um, and the quote is that it takes about 400 repetitions to form a new synapse in your brain, unless done in play. Then it takes 10 to 20. And that gap really shocked me. I was reading all about it this weekend and it was really exciting. I was like, oh, wow, I know play is powerful. I've been a preschool teacher for a long time or infant care worker, and I see it all the time. You know, it's very in my face that play is very useful and natural to us. But I thought, wow, like to, you know, build a new synapse, a thing that connects neurons, that builds neural pathways, right? New ways of being that your brain is forming every day. To have a way to do that in play that is so much more effective than just rote memorization or something like that. I was thinking about that and Hanamatsuri. And so just thinking of that in mind, I'll get back to that at the end of this, but I'll tell briefly the story of Hanamatsuri is yesterday, actually, April 8th every year, is the birth of the Buddha. And so there's a lot of ways that this tale goes. But the main kind of broad strokes of it is that his mother has a dream or a vision, a big white elephant coming in from her right side. And this has a bunch of like symbolism in it for wisdom and premonitions and things like that. But she knows, oh, I'm going to give birth. And so she's in Lumbini's garden, which is a song that we sing in the regular service if you ever hear that one. And it's raining sweet tea. And the Buddha's born. He takes 7 steps. And out of each step grows a lotus flower. And then at the end of that little walk, before he becomes a regular baby again, I'm assuming, he points to the sky and the ground and he says, I alone am the world honored one. And so this is kind of the myth of the birth of the Buddha. And I was thinking about that's what, or more explanation, that's why we have this called a hanamido. It's a kind of flower structure. And the little baby Buddha statue right there is pointing. It'll go in the middle and we'll pour sweet tea as like a kind of recreation of the birth during the main service. And the Dharma school kids and I made these little petals for everybody that'll get passed out, and we'll throw flower petals. It's a really pretty way to celebrate. But thinking of stories like this, of stories that are kind of mythical, magical, legend, and the kind of range of where our own personal beliefs can lie, I like to think of kind of what's one of the values of really engaging with stories like this. And one of the ways to do it, I know, is through play. All of these stories I don't necessarily believe literally happened or happened like they did. You know, there's so many stories. Some I do believe, it doesn't matter really. But regardless, there is a chance to enter into it and play with what's being presented there and see, kind of try it on for myself. That's kind of how I understand or at least approach Buddhism and all these lessons or meditation is it's a chance to form that new way of being by exploring it, trying it on. And one way to kind of make that a little less abstract is I think of kind of this idea of birth, right? Birth can be more, thinking of this story of what it teaches me, birth can be more than just, not just, birth is an amazing thing in its literal self, right? Making a new thing out of other things is wonderful and beautiful. But it can be a different thing. It can be other things as well, right? We can look at it more expansively rather than just the physical act of birth. What other ways are there to birth? What other ways are there to become? And I'm thinking of this play, thinking of the way to really engage things in your brain in a different way and in your body. One of my Zen teachers describes Zen as like the ultimate role playing game. And he says that, we're trying to practice at being the Buddha. What would that be like? What would that be like if I wasn't creating harm? How could I get there? Right? And knowing that I can't get there is not the point. I know that I'm going to create harm, whether it's to somebody else or to myself. It's going to happen over and over again in my lifetime. But what playing with that idea of, okay, let me role play that I wasn't creating harm. Then I can at least dream up kind of the steps to get closer to it, right? I can think, okay, well, somebody who wouldn't create harm would probably speak very nicely to their friends, would probably have a more positive self talk in their head to themselves. Things like that can teach me in a playful, less like pressured way how to kind of put on these masks of calm and grounded or expansive when I don't have that naturally coming out of me, and find different ways to access these ways of being, right? There's not just one way into all these things we're trying to do. And in thinking of play for me, my last example will be I've been wood carving. I remember I showed y'all a spoon last year that I made that I was really excited about when I was just out at an artist residency. And I was watching a documentary on Buddhist sculpture. And it's a really wonderful documentary. I think I'm arranging a screening here for the next couple of months. It'll be sometime, but for Carving the Divine. And these people who have this 14-year-old lineage of carving all those wooden sculptures in Japan of the Buddhas and the big ones too. They're called bushi. And I watched the movie and I was so inspired. And my first instinct as somebody who's, was formerly very rigorously in academia, was to go read all about it. Go learn all the names, learn the lineages, learn their techniques, and be like, oh, that's how I'll understand this lifestyle or this way of being. And instead, I kind of slowed myself down because I was like, well, what will I really know if I just know all their names and some dates? Like, I don't think I'll understand their experience at all much better. I'll just maybe their context and their social location. And so instead, I got a little square, this was like this big before, of stone. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to just try to carve a head. And I set out to carve my partner's head. And if I fail, it'll become a Buddha head because that's a much more forgiving shape to carve. But instead of looking it up online, somebody asked me if I was teaching myself. And I was like, no, I mean, I wouldn't be teaching myself if I was watching somebody else do it anyways. But rather than teaching, I'm just playing. It doesn't have to be good at the end. It doesn't have to be anything really, but I found it's going. Like, this is the outline of a head. It was a big square. These are going to be smaller for ears. And then I'm starting to like make the jaw and neck. And, I've wood carved before, so this isn't a completely unfamiliar thing to me, but I've stone carving a head felt so unapproachable unless through play. And with the like levity of figuring it out, I found myself forming my own techniques, whether they're right or wrong. I'm finding ways to do things that make sense to my body right now. And I think as I learn how to do this, I feel like it would stick much more. It feels much more natural to me than watching a video and then learning. Not that that's a bad way to learn, but just there can be different ways sometimes when the opportunity for play is there. So a little long-winded today, but I was so short last week that I thought maybe I bought myself a minute or two more of talking. But I think play is so important in our practice. How do we play with the things that we also have grief over? How do we find the different approaches into our minds, our bodies, this very moment, into caring for ourselves, getting creative and playful? How do we balance out the seriousness and severity of really urgently trying to get free with the playfulness of experiencing freedom? I think those are my juxtapositions that I've been sitting with this past week. So thank you all so much for listening to me. I appreciate it. Thank you everybody online.